Now, one defense mechanism that I just don't see talked about a lot that I think can actually be a really incredible way that we can gain some understanding of our relationships and our emotional life is called projective identification. So we can understand that projection is, I'm feeling uncomfortable with my anger. I'm putting it onto you. Now, the key part of projection, right, the way that it's a defense is that we cannot seem to recognize that it's in us. So we may be like, what do you mean? I'm not angry. They are angry. That's how we know that there may be a defense at play. Because if I were to say to you, I think you're angry, I don't think they're angry, your initial reaction is to be like, I'm not angry. That's a great indicator that there's a defense. Because what are we saying? The defenses are unconscious. We're not even aware of our own anger. Now, projection in and of itself is a really complicated defense because it can be so easy to get disoriented and feel gaslit. What do you mean? I'm not angry. They are angry, right? And we can feel very confused about what is real. And if we feel really adamant that they are angry and now we have to protect ourselves from their anger, it's going to be really, really hard for us to slow down and examine how actually maybe we may be angry. They may even say to us, I'm not angry. And you may be like, what are you talking about? Your tone and the way you said it clearly shows that you're angry. Now things are getting very confusing. Who is angry here? You feel clear that you're not angry and you feel clear that they're angry. They're saying to you, I'm not angry, you're angry. And it can start to feel like that Spider-Man meme where we're all pointing at each other. And we can start to really get very disoriented about what's real, who's really angry. And it can feel, if we're very rigid, if we feel like we're being now gaslit, like this is what's reality and you're making me question reality, we can then find ourselves getting even more and more defensive and more upset. So one, we have to be careful with these words. Relating to other people by saying that's a projection or, it can actually be quite hurtful. We don't want to be relating to people like their problems and we have to fix them and we have to tell them what they're doing. If somebody says you're angry, there's always a way in which maybe they're true. They're picking up on something. And maybe they're not, and maybe it's not true. But can there be space for an exploration of it? Or is it a sign that one person is right and one person is wrong? And when we start falling into the rabbit hole of who's right and who's wrong, things can get very, very black and white very quickly. But projection in and of itself can be a really complicated defense. And we want to be really careful of how we use it, how we understand it, how we think about it in terms of other people and ourselves. But there's another concept that adds to a complexity to this, but I do think it's really important. And it's this idea of projective identification. So projective identification is almost, it's a relational defense where we are feeling someone's projection. Someone is projecting something onto us, but then we identify with that projection. This happens, as a therapist. It's a language that therapists, especially psychoanalytic psychotherapists, are really trained to understand and to listen for. Because when I'm sitting in front of person A and I did not get a lot of sleep last night, for example, okay, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I have a patient, let's say 8 a.m. And I feel wide awake. I feel good. I feel like, woo, like I'm in work mode. This feels good. I'm alive. There's a lot going on in the session. And then the session ends. And then my 9 o'clock shows up. And my 9 o'clock has a way in which I'm now in the session feeling tremendously sleepy and feeling really hard to be engaged in and really hard to stay connected with the session. I may now experience that emotion as me. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so it makes sense now. My coffee is run out. Now I'm feeling sleepy. I'm feeling tired. That makes sense. This is probably me. But then I have a 10 a.m. And in my 10 a.m., I feel back to being really awake and energized. And I feel really connected. And I feel like there's a lot going on. Now things start to get interesting. What changed between my 9 and my 10? Is the feeling of sleepiness, as it partially lies in me, but also maybe coming from my client. It's a feeling that they are having a hard time tolerating, And so they project it onto me. And now I'm identifying with that feeling. The power of understanding projective identification is we start to see that there is a way in which communication is taking place between two people that is not just verbal. There are unconscious ways in which we are communicating with each other that, again, is not even in our awareness. And it often happens in the language of emotions. And the cool thing about projective identification is that it's a way that we start to open up the possibility that there's something being communicated from the other person that is not really mine. And if I'm identifying with it, I'm missing on the opportunity of seeing it as something that's happening relationally. So projection in and of itself is a complicated idea, but now we're adding another complicated idea. We're adding a complex system of a reciprocal form of communication where an individual is unconsciously attributing their own internal feelings to somebody else. So that's the projection. But then the person receiving that projection may begin to feel or behave in ways that align with what is projected onto them, or they are identifying, they are experiencing it as something of themselves. So let's go back to the example of the anger. So a person A feels deeply angry, can't acknowledge it. It's unconscious, but projects that anger onto person B and says, "You're angry." And now they may not even be saying it. They may just subtly provoke them. They may just snap at them. Right now, person B may start feeling and expressing anger, which seemingly validates person A's original unconscious belief that person B is angry. But this anger that person B is feeling isn't really theirs. It's what they're picking up and identifying with from person A. It can get so complicated. And I can appreciate and understand why we may be reluctant to understand projective identification, because it adds such a complexity to our already wrought with complicated feelings in our interpersonal dynamics. But what can be cool about projective identification is that we can start to question and create some space inside of ourselves to wonder, is what we're feeling really ours, or are we picking up something that somebody else is having a hard time holding? Yeah. So projective identification can provide valuable insight into unconscious dynamics of relationships. It can help us understand, how to become more aware of our own emotional states, how we can start to own more of our feelings so we no longer need to use projection or projective identification as a form of communication, right? And it can help us develop a healthier way relating to others. But again, to be clear, projective identification is not bad. It is a sign of our interrelatedness. It is a sign of how often emotional communication is happening without our awareness. And when we can start to get curious about what may be here, and we start to create space for us to feel into our feelings in a different way, we can actually start to foster a deeper type of intimacy with other people. So, important concepts for a better life. The more we know ourselves, the better. But there are all sorts of ways that we can't ever fully know ourselves. However, the ways in which we are defending against what we don't know could actually be preventing us from feeling more free. We have inner conflicts. We have ways in which we both want and don't want. We have ways in which we're trying to protect our sense of self, preserve our goodness by trying to defend against more aggressive tendencies, anger, frustration. If we've been taught that anger, for example, is not accepted and won't be tolerated, we may now try to never feel angry. Does that make the anger go away? No, the anger is still there, but now it's driven unconscious, where it now has more opportunities to wreak havoc in our lives. We may, because we don't know how to hold anger, when anger does come up, it's very destructive, right? So the more that we can learn about ourselves, the more that we can expand our emotional capacities, bear more of our emotional life, It's not that we have less unconscious. We will always have an unconscious, but that the more space we can then create between the action and the reaction.